Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom? My millionaire son asked with a warm smile as he wrapped his arms around me at our family Christmas party. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. What $5,000? I replied. For a moment, the room seemed to go silent. My son's smile faded. Across the dining room, my daughter-in-law Vanessa nearly dropped her glass of sparkling cider. That was the moment I realized a secret had been living inside my family for years. I'm Margaret Collins. I'm 71 years old, a widow, a mother, and until that Christmas Eve, I thought I understood the people I loved. The party was being held at Ethan and Vanessa's beautiful home just outside Denver. Every year, they hosted Christmas Eve dinner for family and close friends. The house looked like something out of a holiday magazine. White lights wrapped around the banisters. A 12-foot Christmas tree stood in the living room, covered in silver ornaments and red ribbons. The smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh cookies filled the air. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone except me, though I had become good at hiding it. I wore the same dark green dress I had owned for nearly 6 years. I had carefully curled my silver hair that afternoon and applied a little lipstick before driving over. Looking presentable still mattered to me. Some habits never leave you. Ethan had greeted me at the front door with his usual enthusiasm. He was 38 now, the founder of a successful software company, and one of the hardest working people I knew. I was proud of him. No matter how difficult my own life had become, I never stopped being proud of my son. We gathered around the fireplace while grandchildren opened early presents. Laughter filled the room. Christmas music played softly in the background. Then Ethan walked over carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. He handed one to me and smiled. By the way, Mom, he said casually, how are you enjoying the $5,000 a month? I've been meaning to ask. At first I thought he was joking. I laughed politely. I think you have the wrong mother, I said. But Ethan wasn't laughing. The money, he said. The $5,000 I've been sending every month for the last 3 years. My hands tightened around the mug. 3 years. $5,000 every month. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Ethan, I said quietly, I've never received anything like that. His face went pale. The room around us continued buzzing with conversation, completely unaware that something had just changed forever. Ethan stared at me. I stared back. Then both of us slowly turned toward Vanessa. She was standing near the kitchen island talking to relatives, but suddenly she seemed very interested in avoiding our eyes. She picked up a napkin, put it down, smoothed her hair, looked everywhere except at us. A strange feeling settled into my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something heavier. Because I had spent the last 3 years counting every dollar, postponing doctor appointments, keeping my thermostat lower than I wanted during winter, and convincing myself that my son was simply too busy to notice. And now, standing beside a glowing Christmas tree, I was beginning to understand that someone had noticed all along. For several seconds, neither Ethan nor I spoke. The noise of the Christmas party faded into the background, replaced by the sound of my own thoughts racing through years of memories that suddenly looked different. Ethan slowly set his mug down on a side table. His eyes never left Vanessa. I had seen that expression before. It was the same look his father used to get whenever something did not add up. Across the room, Vanessa laughed at something a cousin said, but the laugh sounded forced. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders. Ethan finally leaned closer to me. Mom, are you absolutely sure? He asked quietly. $5,000. Every month. Since January 3 years ago. I nodded. Ethan, I would remember receiving that kind of money. My voice remained calm, but inside I felt unsettled. $5,000 a month would have changed everything. It would have meant sleeping without worrying about bills. It would have meant replacing the old water heater that failed every winter. It would have meant saying yes when my doctor recommended additional tests instead of telling him I needed more time to think about it. Ethan rubbed his forehead. That cannot be right. I looked down at my hands. The skin was thinner now than it had been years ago. Age has a way of making time move quickly and slowly at the same time. 3 years. 36 months. $180,000. The number felt impossible. Yet what hurt more than the money was the realization that my son believed he had been helping me all along. While he thought I was secure, I had been quietly struggling. While he believed I was comfortable, I had been clipping grocery coupons and postponing purchases. Suddenly, so many moments came back to me. Birthdays when Vanessa insisted they were too busy to visit. Holidays shortened because of scheduling conflicts. Phone calls that seemed rushed. Invitations that never arrived. At the time, I had told myself not to take it personally. Families grow. Lives become complicated. Children build their own worlds. But now I wondered if there had been another reason. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. The glow reflected in his eyes as he searched through old records. A minute later, he showed me the display. There were transfers. Dozens of them. The amounts were identical. $5,000. Month after month. My stomach tightened. The records were real. Ethan stared at the screen, then at me. I have confirmation numbers for every payment. I swallowed carefully. Then whoever received that money was not me. We both looked toward Vanessa again. This time she noticed. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Something flashed across her face. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. Then she smiled and walked toward us carrying a tray of Christmas cookies. "What are you two talking about over here?" she asked cheerfully. Ethan locked his phone and slipped it back into his pocket. "Nothing important," he said. Vanessa studied him for a second longer than necessary. Then she handed me a cookie. "You should try one. Emma helped decorate them." I thanked her and accepted it. Her smile remained perfectly pleasant. To anyone else, everything looked normal. But something had changed. I could feel it. Ethan could feel it too. An invisible crack had appeared in the middle of the evening. The Christmas lights still glowed. The grandchildren still laughed. Holiday music still floated through the house. Yet beneath all of it, a question waited quietly for an answer. If Ethan had truly been sending that money for 3 years, where had it gone? The rest of the evening moved forward as if nothing had happened, but I noticed things I might have missed before. Ethan became quieter. He smiled when relatives spoke to him, but his attention kept drifting back toward Vanessa. Every few minutes, I caught him watching her. Not angrily, not suspiciously, more like a man trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly no longer fit together. Vanessa, meanwhile, seemed determined to keep everyone occupied. She refilled drinks before anyone asked. She suggested family photos. She organized a game for the grandchildren. She moved constantly, never sitting in one place for long. The more she smiled, the more nervous she appeared. Around 8 o'clock, my granddaughter Lily wandered over and climbed onto the sofa beside me. At 10 years old, she possessed the kind of honesty that only children seem able to maintain. She leaned against my shoulder and looked around the room. "Grandma, are you okay?" she asked. "Of course," I said gently. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "You look worried." "Dad looks worried too." Children notice more than adults realize. I smiled and squeezed her hand. Sometimes grown-ups have things to figure out. She nodded thoughtfully before taking a bite of a sugar cookie. Then she said something that made me pause. "I always wondered why your house looks different from everyone else's." I laughed softly. "Different how?" "Well," she said, lowering her voice. "Dad always says he takes care of you. But your refrigerator is really old. And your car is old too. And last summer your air conditioner stopped working, remember?" I remembered. During a heat wave, temperatures had reached nearly 100 degrees. I had spent 3 days using box fans while waiting to save enough money for repairs. "Sometimes things wear out," I replied. Lily frowned. "That still seems weird." Then she hopped down and ran off toward the Christmas tree. I sat very still. The comment itself was innocent, but it lingered in my mind. Across the room, Ethan was speaking with his business partner near the fireplace. Vanessa joined them briefly, then left when she noticed me watching. For the first time in years, I began replaying old memories from a different perspective. There was the Christmas when Ethan mailed me an expensive tablet that never arrived. Vanessa had assured him it was delivered safely. There was the birthday gift card Ethan claimed he had sent. I never received that either. Then there were the flowers he swore he ordered after my surgery 2 years earlier. I had waited all week for them. Nothing came. At the time, I assumed mistakes happened. Packages got lost. Deliveries failed. Life moved on. But standing inside that beautifully decorated house, I wondered how many of those missing things were actually connected. Around 9 o'clock, guests began leaving. Coats were collected. Leftovers were packed into containers. Children carried new toys to waiting cars. The evening should have felt warm and comforting. Instead, an uneasy silence seemed to follow Ethan wherever he went. Finally, as I prepared to leave, Ethan helped me put on my coat. "Mom," he said quietly, I want you to promise me something. What is that? Do not worry about this tonight. Let me look into it. I studied his face. He looked older than he had just a few hours earlier. Not physically, emotionally, like a man discovering that trust can be far more fragile than money. All right, I said. But Ethan, whatever you find, be prepared for the possibility that you may not like the answer. He glanced toward the kitchen, where Vanessa was loading dishes into the dishwasher. Then he looked back at me. I am starting to think that already. The drive home felt longer than usual. Snow had started falling lightly across the suburbs, covering rooftops and quiet streets with a thin layer of white. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and replayed the evening in my mind. Ethan's expression, Vanessa's reaction, Lily's innocent observation. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with age. My small house sat quietly beneath the porch light. The same house I had lived in for 27 years. The same house where I had raised Ethan. I stepped inside and was greeted by familiar silence. The refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. The old clock above the fireplace ticked steadily. Everything looked exactly as it had the day before, yet somehow nothing felt the same. I hung my coat, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. For a long time, I simply stared at the steam rising from the mug. Then my eyes drifted toward a stack of unpaid bills sitting beside a fruit bowl. There was the property tax notice I had been worrying about for weeks. A heating repair estimate from last month. Medical paperwork waiting for a decision I had been postponing because I was unsure whether I could comfortably afford it. I had become accustomed to calculating every expense. Not because I wanted to, but because I believed I had no choice. The realization settled heavily on me. If Ethan had truly been sending money all these years, then my struggles had never been necessary. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. Sunlight reflected off the fresh snow outside my bedroom window. I made breakfast and tried to distract myself with routine. I watered the plants. I folded laundry. I organized kitchen cabinets that did not need organizing. But my thoughts kept returning to the same question. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Ethan. I answered immediately. His voice sounded calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. Mom, do you have a few minutes? Of course. There was a brief pause. I spent most of the night reviewing records. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. And the transfers are real. His voice became quieter. Every month. Same amount. Same account. My stomach tightened. Do you know whose account? Another pause. Not yet. But I noticed something strange. I waited. The account information was updated 3 years ago. I never changed it myself. I closed my eyes. Who had access? That is exactly what I am trying to find out. He sounded frustrated now. Not angry. Frustrated. The kind of frustration that comes from discovering gaps in something you believed was solid. Ethan, I said gently, whatever happens, do not rush to conclusions. He gave a short laugh without humor. I am trying not to. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo album. Sometimes when life becomes confusing, I find myself looking backward. There was Ethan at age 8 holding a baseball glove almost as large as his head. Ethan at 16 standing beside his first used car. Ethan on his college graduation day. In every picture, I saw the same kind-hearted boy I had raised. The same boy who used to leave handwritten notes on my kitchen counter whenever he stayed over. Looking through those photographs, I realized something important. Whatever had happened, Ethan was searching for the truth. And for the first time in years, I had the uneasy feeling that someone else was desperately hoping he would not find it. 3 days passed before Ethan called again. During that time, neither of us mentioned the situation to anyone else. I spent my days following familiar routines, but every ordinary task felt different now. Each time I opened my mailbox, paid a bill, or looked at an old family photograph, I found myself wondering how much of my life had been shaped by information I never had. On the 4th morning, my phone rang just after 9. The moment I heard Ethan's voice, I knew something had changed. He sounded focused, determined. Mom, he said, I found out who updated the account information. I sat down immediately. Who? There was a brief silence. The change was submitted from our home computer 3 years ago. My grip tightened around the phone. Does that prove anything? Not by itself, he replied. But I kept digging. He explained that his company employed a financial compliance consultant named Daniel Harper. Daniel had helped review old transaction records and account authorizations. What they discovered was troubling. The account receiving the monthly deposits had not been in my name. It had never been in my name. Yet somehow it had been connected to my profile inside the payment system. How is that possible? I asked. Someone added an alternate receiving account during an update, Ethan said quietly. The authorization trail points to a user with administrator access. And who had that access? Another pause. Vanessa. I closed my eyes. Even though part of me had expected the answer, hearing it spoken aloud felt different. He continued. I am still gathering facts. I do not want assumptions. I want proof. That sounded exactly like Ethan. Even as a child, he never liked accusing someone without evidence. After we ended the call, I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking. I was not angry. Not yet. Mostly I felt sad. Sad for the years that could not be returned. Sad for the trust that now seemed fragile. Sad because families are supposed to make life simpler, not more complicated. Later that evening, another memory surfaced. About 2 years earlier, I had mentioned replacing my aging refrigerator. The door seal was failing, and the freezer worked only when it felt like cooperating. A week later, Ethan called and told me not to worry about it. He said he had already sent extra money to help. I remembered thanking him politely while feeling confused. At the time, I assumed he was mistaken. Now I realized that conversation had never made sense because we were each living in different versions of reality. The next day, Ethan called again. This time his voice carried something new. Disappointment. Daniel found additional transfers, he said. Not just the monthly payments. I listened carefully. Birthday gifts. Holiday gifts. Money intended for home repairs. Medical assistance. Small amounts. Large amounts. Over the years, they added up to a number neither of us wanted to calculate. I do not understand, Ethan said quietly. Why would someone do this? I looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. Sometimes people make one bad decision, I said. Then they spend years trying to protect it. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly. Daniel thinks there is enough documentation now. Enough for what? Enough to know? This was not a mistake. As the call ended, I placed my phone on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Somewhere, very close to the truth, someone was still pretending everything was normal. But the truth has a way of moving quietly through the cracks. And once it starts moving, it rarely stops. The following week brought an unexpected kind of quiet. Not peace. Just the silence that settles over a family when something important remains unspoken. Ethan did not confront Vanessa. At least not yet. Instead, he continued gathering information with Daniel's help. Every few days he called me with another piece of the puzzle. Each conversation revealed something new. Each discovery made the picture clearer. One afternoon, Ethan told me that Daniel had traced several of the transfers beyond the original account. The money had not simply remained there. It had been moved. Portions had gone toward luxury purchases, vacations, and private accounts. Nothing illegal on the surface. Just spending that never should have been funded by money intended for someone else. After the call ended, I sat in my living room staring at the old bookshelf across from me. What surprised me most was not the missing money. It was how many memories now seemed connected to it. I remembered inviting Ethan to dinner countless times over the years. Often he wanted to come. Just as often, plans changed at the last minute. Vanessa would explain that he was overwhelmed with work. There was a business trip, a school event, a scheduling conflict. At the time, her reasons always sounded reasonable. Looking back, I realized how rarely I spoke with Ethan directly about those cancellations. Messages passed through Vanessa. Information passed through Vanessa. Even gifts and letters sometimes passed through Vanessa. Another memory surfaced. 3 years earlier, shortly after the account information had been changed, Ethan stopped mentioning financial concerns whenever we talked. Before that, he often asked whether I needed help with repairs or expenses. Then suddenly he seemed relaxed, confident, reassured. Now I understood why. He genuinely believed I was receiving support every month. He thought my difficulties had been solved. We had both been living inside the same misunderstanding, carefully maintained by someone standing between us. A few days later, Ethan visited my house alone. That alone felt unusual. When he arrived, he looked tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired, like someone carrying a weight that grew heavier each day. We sat at the kitchen table where he had done homework as a child. The same table where his father used to read the newspaper every morning. Ethan looked around the room slowly. His eyes settled on the aging refrigerator, then on the worn flooring near the sink. Finally, he looked at the patched ceiling above the dining area. "How long has that leak been there?" he asked. "About a year." He stared at me. "Why did you never tell me?" I smiled gently. "Because I thought you had enough on your plate." He looked away. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said something that broke my heart. "I thought I was taking care of you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You were trying to." His eyes became glassy for a moment. Not with anger, with regret. There is a difference. Anger looks outward. Regret looks inward. Before leaving, Ethan stood by the front door longer than usual. "Daniel found something else," he said. "What?" "There are emails." My stomach tightened. "What kind of emails?" "Messages I never saw. Notifications redirected. Correspondence altered. It appears this went beyond money." He paused. "A lot beyond money." After he left, I stood alone in the doorway watching snow drift across the yard. The missing funds had started this story, but I was beginning to understand that the real loss might be measured in something much harder to calculate. Lost years, lost conversations, lost opportunities, and somewhere, very soon, someone would have to explain all of it. 2 days later, Ethan called and asked if I would be available the following Saturday afternoon. His voice sounded steady, but I could hear careful planning behind every word. "Daniel has finished organizing everything," he said. "I think it is time." I knew exactly what he meant. The waiting was over. The truth had reached the point where it could no longer remain hidden inside spreadsheets and email records. Saturday arrived cold and bright. Fresh snow covered the sidewalks, and sunlight reflected off the rooftops. I spent the morning trying to keep busy, but concentration felt impossible. Around noon, Ethan called again. "I am hosting a family brunch tomorrow," he said. "Everyone will be there." "Does Vanessa know why?" I asked. "No," his answer came quickly. "She thinks it is just a delayed holiday gathering." After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my living room. The house felt unusually still. I looked around at the furniture I had owned for years, the photographs lining the shelves, the small decorations left over from Christmas. So many ordinary things. Yet behind those ordinary things lived years of unanswered questions that were finally about to receive answers. Later that evening, Ethan stopped by. He carried a folder thick with documents. He did not open it. He simply placed it on the coffee table and sat across from me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "It is worse than I thought." I looked at him carefully. "How much worse?" He rubbed his forehead. "The money was only the beginning." Then he explained what Daniel had uncovered. Email forwarding rules had redirected financial notifications. Delivery confirmations had been intercepted. Several messages Ethan had sent over the years had never reached me. Some had been answered on my behalf without my knowledge. Others disappeared entirely. The pattern stretched back years. Not months. Years. "I do not understand how I missed it," Ethan said quietly. "Because you trusted someone," I replied. "Trust makes certain things invisible." He looked down at the folder. "Daniel believes everything can be documented." "Then what happens tomorrow?" Ethan was silent for a moment. "Tomorrow," I asked questions. The next day arrived. By noon, relatives began gathering at Ethan's house. Cars filled the driveway. Children played in the family room. Conversations drifted through the kitchen. From the outside, it looked like any ordinary family event. Vanessa greeted guests with her usual warmth. She smiled. She laughed. She moved comfortably through the crowd. Watching her, no one would have suspected anything unusual. Yet I noticed something subtle. Every few minutes, her eyes searched for Ethan. And every time she found him, he was watching her. Not openly, not dramatically, just quietly, patiently. Daniel arrived shortly after 1 o'clock, carrying a slim leather briefcase. Vanessa seemed surprised to see him. "I did not realize Ethan invited work colleagues today," she said with a polite smile. Daniel returned the smile. "Just stopping by for a short visit." For the first time all afternoon, I noticed uncertainty flicker across her face. The brunch continued. Plates were filled. Coffee was poured. Family stories were shared. But beneath the surface, something else was building. I could feel it in the room. Ethan could feel it too. He remained calm. Almost too calm. Like a man who had finally finished assembling a puzzle and was preparing to show everyone the picture. As the afternoon moved forward, Vanessa continued smiling, continued talking, continued acting as though everything was perfectly normal. But what she did not know was that every answer she might give had already been compared against years of records. And for the first time since that Christmas evening, the truth was no longer chasing her. The truth was waiting for her. Eventually, Ethan stood and tapped his glass lightly. The conversations around the room faded. Family members looked up from their plates. Children paused their games. Vanessa smiled at him from across the kitchen island, apparently expecting a holiday toast. Ethan returned the smile, but there was something different in his expression now. Something calm. Something final. "Before everyone leaves," he said, "there is something important I would like to discuss." The room grew quiet. Vanessa set down her coffee cup. Daniel remained seated near the end of the table, his briefcase resting beside his chair. Ethan glanced around the room before continuing. "Over the past few weeks, I discovered information that concerns my family and my mother." At the mention of my name, several relatives turned toward me. I remained silent. Ethan looked directly at Vanessa. 3 years ago, I began sending financial support every month to help my mother." Vanessa's smile did not disappear, but it became noticeably smaller. "That is very generous," one aunt said. Ethan nodded. "The problem is that she never received it." A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Vanessa laughed softly. "There must have been some accounting error." Ethan did not respond immediately. Instead, he opened a folder and removed several documents. "That is what I thought at first." He placed copies on the table. "Then Daniel helped me review the records." Every eye shifted toward Daniel. Vanessa crossed her arms. "I do not understand why a family brunch suddenly sounds like a business meeting." Ethan's voice remained steady. "Because this is not about business. It is about trust." For the first time, genuine discomfort appeared on Vanessa's face. Daniel calmly opened his briefcase and produced additional documents. He spoke without raising his voice. The account receiving the monthly transfers was connected through administrative changes made from a home device registered to this residence. The room became very still. Vanessa looked at Daniel, then at Ethan. "What exactly are you implying?" she asked. Ethan slid another document across the table. "I am not implying anything. I am showing evidence." Vanessa barely glanced at it. "This is ridiculous." Ethan continued. "The records show redirected notifications, altered account information, missing correspondence, financial transfers that never reached their intended recipient." Each sentence seemed to make the room quieter. Vanessa shook her head. "You cannot seriously believe I planned all of this." "Then explain it," Ethan said. His tone remained calm. That calmness seemed more powerful than anger would have been. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, she appeared to search for an explanation. "I handled so many family accounts," she finally said. "Mistakes happen." Daniel gently slid another page forward. "A single mistake does not repeat itself for years." No one spoke. The clock above the stove ticked softly. Somewhere in the family room, one of the children laughed, unaware of the tension filling the house. Vanessa looked around the table as if hoping someone would defend her. No one did. Not because they were against her, but because the documents were speaking louder than anyone else could. Ethan looked exhausted. "Do you know what hurts the most?" he asked quietly. "It is not the money." Vanessa stared at him. "Then what?" He glanced toward me. "For years, I thought my mother was safe, comfortable, taken care of. Meanwhile, she was struggling while I believed everything was fine." The silence that followed seemed endless. Vanessa lowered her eyes to the table, and for the first time since this entire story began, she stopped trying to explain anything at all. No one moved for several seconds. The room remained frozen in a silence that felt heavier than any argument. Vanessa sat staring at the table while the documents remained spread before her. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not demand explanations. Somehow that made the moment even more powerful. Eventually, Vanessa spoke. Her voice was quiet. "I never thought it would go this far." Ethan looked at her carefully. "Neither did I." She lowered her eyes again. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed unable to find the right words. There were no confident explanations, no polished answers, no quick redirections, just silence. Family members gradually began excusing themselves from the table, not because they were angry, because they understood that some conversations belonged to the people living inside them. Daniel quietly gathered his documents and prepared to leave. Before he walked out, he shook Ethan's hand and gave him a small nod. The evidence had done its job. The rest was a family matter. Over the following weeks, many difficult conversations took place. Some happened between Ethan and Vanessa. Others happened between Ethan and me. What mattered most was not assigning blame. What mattered was understanding how years of trust had slowly been replaced by years of misunderstanding. The financial arrangements were corrected. The missing funds were accounted for. Practical problems received practical solutions. But money was never the true heart of the story. The true loss had been time. Time spent believing things that were not true. Time spent worrying when help had supposedly been available. Time spent apart when we should have been closer. One Saturday morning about 2 months later, Ethan arrived at my house carrying a toolbox. He looked around the kitchen and smiled. "Where do we start?" I laughed. "With that refrigerator you have been staring at for weeks." We spent the day making repairs around the house. He fixed loose cabinet hinges, replaced old light fixtures, helped arrange appointments for larger projects that had been postponed for years. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary things. Yet those ordinary things felt important because they represented something much larger. We were rebuilding trust one small action at a time. A few weeks later, Lily came over for dinner. While we were eating, she looked around the kitchen and smiled. "Everything looks nicer in here." Ethan laughed from across the table. "That is because Grandma finally let me help." "Good," Lily said. "Families are supposed to help each other." The simplicity of her statement made everyone smile. Children often understand truths that adults complicate. By the time the next Christmas arrived, life looked different. Not perfect. No family is perfect. But healthier, honest, peaceful. On Christmas Eve, Ethan stopped by early carrying a small wrapped package. "Open this one first," he said. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed the three of us standing together during the previous summer. Me, Ethan, and Lily. We were laughing at something outside the frame. None of us looking at the camera, just sharing a moment. I stared at the picture for a long time. "It is my favorite one," Ethan said softly. "Mine too," I replied. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I placed the photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. Then I sat quietly in my favorite chair and looked at it. The greatest gift I received from this entire experience was not financial security. It was clarity. The truth had exposed painful things, but it had also made healing possible. Sometimes the most valuable thing a family can recover is not money. It is each other.